Hello, my name is Daniel Stillwell. I'm the editor of the IFTA e-newsletter, and we have with us today Jay Lebow. Jay is clinical professor of psychology at Northwestern University, as well as a senior scholar and therapist at the Family Institute at Northwestern University. He's been the editor and author of many books. He's the editor of the Encyclopedia for Couple and Family Therapy, kind of a big deal. And for the last 10 plus years, since 2012, he's been the editor of the journal Family Process. He'll be stepping down from that role at the end of the year, and he's been generous enough to spend some time with us to talk about his experience and wisdom and maybe how we can move forward as a global international field. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So I guess the first question, and the one I like to ask all my people, since we have an international audience, therapy looks different in different places. So what kind of clinical practitioner do you identify as, and what does that look like where you work?
Well, I have always identified as a couple and family therapist. So, there are many professional guilds that 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 practice in couple and family therapy, psychology, MFT, counseling, whatever. I think the transcendent category is the one that matters. Couple and family therapy.
Okay. What kind of clients have you found that you typically work with?
I work with a range of clients. I work in the context of a model we've developed called integrative systemic therapy.
Mm,
So I see individuals, couples, and families, but all in the context of a systemic way of working. And the people I work with range enormously in terms of socioeconomic status, all the demographics. I work in a fairly urban location, so pretty much everybody's urban, but that's about it.
okay.
General thing. I have a sort of subspecialty in high conflict divorce, so I see a whole bunch of high conflict divorce families, in addition to the other couples and families I see.
Yeah, that's definitely tough work. So I'm glad you're putting your efforts in that direction. Um, Switching to the other professional hat you wear, you've been a teacher, professor, supervisor for all sorts of different things. What are you doing in that realm these days?
I do a supervision group that's now been weekly for for maybe 20 years.
Mm,
So I do supervision group in systemic therapy. Um, I have just completed a project that's called the Casebook of Couple Therapy. It's an edited book that is just a fascinating array of distinguished couple therapists who presented uh, cases. It's just a wonderful and informative thing to look in depth at how couple therapists work with specific cases, and often how that it sort of varies from the more didactic sorts of things that people say about doing couple uh, therapy.
I know that one of the things that I've always admired about you, and I've definitely heard others talk about, is your ability to articulate sort of meta or trans aspects between the models in the different fields. So I'm not surprised that you're finding enjoyment and meaning in more of an inductive method of teaching models and interventions and things.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look from the ground up about people have always practiced. Actually, you've cued into maybe the one of the major take home points that I try to stress in all of my work, that we have 700 different ways of naming things.
Mm,
Uh, and it can sound like everybody's doing something radically different than everybody else, and then you have this phenomenon of the new invention of the old technique,
right.
given that there are only so many things that therapists in general do, systemic therapists do, right? But you can name them new and different sorts of things. But if you look at as in the casebook, what really effective couple therapists do. Um, it's clear enough that that includes a transcendent set of things, and
Mm.
right, and some of them are the common factors. I wrote a book with Doug Sprinkle and Sean Davis about common factors. Some of them are the common factors in systemic therapy, right? These things like alliance and keeping a systemic perspective or whatever. But it actually it's actually these this sort of inductive way of looking at couple and family therapy. The techniques people do mostly overlap with each other a tremendous amount, right?
Mm.
There again, there is this sort of Tower of Babel. We name things in different ways, and there's some very real differences between things
Sure.
couple family therapists do. I don't want to have it boiled down to we all do the same things, but on the other hand, when you look at effective therapists, they draw from a pretty well-known list of techniques, strategies, ways of joining and intervening that are pretty universal, right? That where people borrow from each other all over the place, whatever the naming of what they're doing is.
Right. I think there's something magical in the fact that there are probably only so many sort of ingredients, but there's an infinite amount of meals that we can make.
Absolutely, absolutely, and of course, actually that was such a wonderful thing you added, because the great chefs,
Mm.
they do put these together in very special ways, right?
Hmm.
And from time, when I began, when the people who were senior to me were people like Carl Whitaker and Murray Bowen and
Yeah.
Sal Minuchin and these, and like especially back then with those people, but continuing now into our great therapists now. Really good therapists just have these special ways of putting things together, right? That are just so special and unique and wonderful. And often, what will happen is that the beginning therapist will try to copy at some at some level the behavior, right?
Hmm.
Without like, I love your analogy. Is like they like don't quite know how much pepper to put in.
Yeah, they think they're following a recipe, but it's
The great,
also by
the
feel.
great chef goes like this with the pepper, right? And they're like
Hmm.
trying to measure out whatever, you know what I mean? So it becomes that process of how information gets transmitted, how training goes on, how people get skillful in this way that people get skillful, usually
Hmm.
around getting lots and lots and lots of experience. That thing spoken of 10,000 repetitions, right? It just where it gets to be natural for you, and you, uh, as an offshoot of this, my other related thing I've written many, many times is about each therapist putting together their own therapeutic package, which is really of kind of that
Yeah.
which they do well,
Hmm.
right? Because the therapist as a factor in the therapy. The therapist is a very, very important part of the therapy. So, I've always been fond of saying, when I started my career, lots of people did paradoxical injunctions, right? Okay, I tried it. I was terrible at
Yeah.
it. Other people could do them really well. I was just was disingenuous and just not me. And so it's just like some of it is just how the technique fits with the therapist, and
Mm.
how it feels part of your being genuine and in the moment and all that stuff. So
And
yeah.
I think one thing that we're discovering is that is similarly true for the switch to teletherapy. The
Mm,
therapists that are not good at it, that can't buy in, are not as effective as the
that's
ones who find it to be more natural.
No, that's right. And there you often have a generational thing where younger
Hmm.
people are just much more comfortable with teletherapy usually, right?
Yeah.
And because they've just grown up in a much more video environment. So yeah.
Well, I think some of the themes that we're talking about, even in this idea of the value of the case, the book as well, uh, a lot of that applies to your work as editor.
Mhm.
So, what are some of the themes that you've seen in publishing during your tenure, and what do you want to push for continuing forward with the new editor?
Yeah. So let me just highlight in the context of this conversation how, Family Process is a unique journal. It has been it was the place of origin of much of systemic uh, therapy. You know,
1962, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It literally was the newsletter of all those people. It has
Mm,
couple issues, Whitaker or whatever. Jay Haley was the first editor, and and the movement grew up with Family Process. So and Family Process has I'm going to sort of say always. That probably isn't exactly right, but from some of the early days, been a very international focused journal, right? And we don't tend to think of it as it's published, in the United States, but we don't tend to think of it as an American journal. We look to have an international voices
mm,
speaking uh, sort of to each other, right? Very important for me during my time of editor of Family Process has for it to be a place that all of the voices in couple and family therapy could speak to each other. Okay, and so unlike some journals, which might be about, say, narrative therapy or
hmm.
cognitive behavioral therapy, we publish both of those, even though like those conversations are complicated, right? If you juxtapose to an article about CBT and an article about narrative therapy. But we try to find a place for all of the voices for couple and family therapy, for systemic concerns more broadly, for theory and practice and research. And under research, we try to bridge family science, that's the science of families, with research on couple and family therapy
Mm.
and with the theoretical and clinical articles. So in the best of worlds, there are all of these subsystems, and they are interacting into some kind of whole. Even if you zoom into one article and you're in a sort of a piece of the pie somewhere, the, the thought is that like maybe there might be some influence between one and the other, right? That
So
also
the idea that an issue would be a conversation between these different dimensions of an idea or an issue.
we're not we don't quite aim for a conversation between the two of them, but I guess that would be great if that happened, but we do aim for them to be in the same space as each other, and that perhaps if you went to read a narrative therapy article, you might get interested in the one that came from functional family therapy or whatever it might be,
Right.
that you might not pay very much attention to in your ordinary reading. You're going to get the other narrative therapy books or whatever. Yeah. So we try to do that. It also juxtaposes to my great interest in the interface between research and practice, and this balance that I believe in, that I've talked about now for many years,
Yeah.
where each can inform the other. Right? There's that in the worst case picture that sometimes gets painted by people who don't quite see that blend, um, uh, one is coercing the other,
Mm.
right? It's a coercive coercive systemic process, right? Of the researchers are telling the clinicians what to do, or the clinicians are telling the researchers they're not paying any attention to this thing they did, and that one might actually inform the other is the thought, right?
Yeah.
Since since uh, uh, since especially at this point in time, now with 67 years of the field, there's actually a lot of family science that can inform family therapy, and there's a lot of family therapy that can inform family science. So it provides wonderful opportunities for that kind of juxtaposition. Mhm.
When I was able to talk to some professionals in Europe, they were
Mhm.
talking about how the
Mhm.
evidence-based practices are being flipped on their heads a little bit in professional paradigms to being practice-based evidence.
Mhm.
Um, and I hear you saying you want a balance between the experiential and the quote unquote academic side of things. Um, from an international perspective, you've seen many articles come by your way at this point. From an international perspective, how do you want the community of systemic psychotherapists to engage with publishing, since it's often not accessible to everybody?
Well, yeah, uh, at Family Process, we would wish you would send us what you have to write. Now, you know, writing for a sort of academic professional journal slash professional journal is like also a skill you learn how to do, right?
Yeah.
Right? So I don't mean to just saying, like you're in class and you're taking a course and send your paper in. Yeah, that would be asking a lot and probably not lead to such a great outcome. But on the other hand, you take your time, you say you're a clinician and you write up some of your work. At Family Process, we'd be very interested in
Hmm.
that work. And in fact, the papers that are written by clinicians about clinical matters are largely our most downloaded and attended to articles. So we love it when people do that, and we encourage people to write. One of the developments in the field is that in the world of writing is that we go back to the early days of Family Process, people were writing for Family Process and other journals like it all of the time, right? It
Hmm.
was just one. You go back and read, go back to the first issues or read some handbook that's composed from those papers. I mean, all these brilliant things that were being written. They were such great interest. As life as time has evolved, that kind of writing is often done now by people in universities, and so the number of people from outside universities who write those things is really much less than one might think. Uh, yes, I'm just talking about in terms of submissions. I don't even think about what gets into a journal. Yeah, so I think we need to hear from many voices, and people do all sorts of interesting things, and I would very much encourage people to write for the journal.
Because the international community is not always going to be English fluent, how have you worked with language issues?
Yeah, this now gets very complicated, right? Let me say a couple different things there, and I'll start with the more esoteric piece, and I'll get back to the concrete question, right? The more esoteric piece is that people in different countries use words in different ways. Like
Hmm.
the word systemic is used in mighty different ways in different countries, right? And it's very important to as you're editing a journal in this field to be aware of and help of what people mean about words in our field and help the authors communicate what they mean, lest they all get confused about
Sure. Yeah.
not that they're confused about what they're writing about, but that the reader gets confused because you have two words like that that mean very different things. A
Hmm.
word like that is a crucial word, and people just think different things of it. So about it. So that we have those nuances to get to the more concrete question. It's a problem. Right? Yes. it's a problem is that the world speaks many languages, and the good news for an English journal like Family Process is that lots of people today speak English, right? Even if English isn't the first language of a country, there are many languages, many countries now where, at least in the academic environment, it is a second language that people,
Hmm.
often master much better in written language than say Americans do. Um, Still, there are parts, many countries where English is a foreign language. Authors have to go through great trouble to translate their articles into English for them to be considered for international journals. A big problem for authors because in many countries, publishing in these big international journals is like really important for advancing in your field. Yeah, yes. So they have to go through all of, not just to get the recognition in the journals, but also for these other reasons. They have to go through all this trouble of having articles translated, and then the article, if an article is written uh, and then done and translated by a translation service, it often sounds like it's translated by a translation service,
Mm.
right? So this becomes really hard, and so for the editor, there's a very complicated process of trying for those in the about those articles, right? The
Hmm.
ones that are not written by people for whom English is not a second language but a foreign language, right? Of trying to work with them to develop get the language to a point where it can be good enough for the journal, right? In a context where the journal, we don't have at Family Process, at least published by Wiley, we don't have vast resources from Wiley, for them to work
Right.
extensively on every article. Yeah, so so that becomes a quite complicated problem, right? And we're very aware of it, and we've tried over time. Family Process tried to be proactive in this in a number of ways. One thing we did was for many years, we translated all the abstracts of the journal into multiple languages, and we took one article, an issue, and translated it into a couple of languages. And we discovered that with the abstracts, that you probably can just put an abstract through Google Translate and get something pretty okay for an abstract. So what wasn't adding that much to do that, and then translating one article per issue. We didn't get many downloads of the
Mm.
translated articles for whatever reason. So it's a complicated thing. We've done a couple of articles where we tried to have them written in the author's original language and translated into English.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that got to be a yeah, here I got to get into some of the complexities of journal editing. Papers that don't appear, somebody writes you a paper and you accept it. They go through Family Process, usually 3 or 4 versions before they're
Hmm.
accepted, right? And so now we're literally having the paper written, translated. Um, uh, we had people uh, to try I'm going to the complexity of this, but we had people try to people who were if we're talking about Spanish language article, we had people who were native Spanish speakers as the reviewers, but then I was the editor and I didn't speak Spanish, so then
Yeah.
their reviews had to get translated into English.
Hmm.
It got very complicated and too cumbersome. So that we've tried our best with that,
Certainly.
and
And
there's
I would imagine that as AI and Google Translate or any of the other services, as they continue to improve, that some of this will
Yes,
be made a little bit more smooth.
those things
I hear you communicating, because family process is one of the preeminent couple family systemic psychotherapy journals in the world. You guys do a ton of great stuff and you have a long history. And even you are saying, hey, clinician in country X, you think you have a cool idea? You think you've got some good work? Write it down, let us know what's happening, and we'll help you out if we can.
absolutely, and not, you know, excuse me, there aren't 10,000 of your peers who are doing the same thing. I mean, actually, people are very busy.
Mm-hmm.
This is a special skill. If you are ready to put the work in to, figure out how to write something well, we'd be very, very interested.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for the time that you've been given us. Anything else that you want to add about your life professionally or personally?
No, it's been a wonderful interview, the crucial thing for me as I sort of exit as editor of Family Process is that this systemic idea, now in its 70 or 80th year, whatever it is, like, it was a brilliant idea. All the evidence in the world, that is all the empirical evidence, is that it is a brilliant idea,
Mm-hmm.
right? Right? People learn in special ways in families. Families are crucial unit for delivering almost everything. Yes. Looking forward, there is is keeping uh, the momentum going of this brilliant idea, right? And as we get several generations down the road from it, we have all these diversity of approaches and whatever. Just keeping that momentum going in some sort of coherent way, just for me, like, that's the mission for the future. So,
Wonderful. Thank you. That's a great final note. Thank you very much for being
okay,
with us today, Dr. Jay Lebow, and we'll be seeing you.
okay, thank you.